Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest panic amongst Brexiteers over the prospect of voting reform under Labour. No, not proportional representation yet, that's the end goal, but these stepping stones of wider participation. Arch Brexiteer Daniel Hannan is expressing concern about the prospect of settled EU citizens voting in future general elections. But his arguments are a little hypocritical because non-British citizens already vote. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I never really subscribe to the view that if you're upsetting the right people, then you're doing something right. Causing upset is sometimes necessary, but it's not a worthwhile aim in itself and is certainly no metric of success. However, it can be instructive. Daniel Hannan has been quoted in an article in the Express as sounding the alarm at Labour's plans to give settled EU citizens a vote in general elections. He makes two main arguments against it, which are frankly laughable, particularly from a Brexiteer. The first is that EU countries don't do this. I mean, this is the most ridiculous argument you could imagine a Brexiteer making, and they do it so often. Aren't they always arguing that we should do things differently to the EU? So why is doing something differently all of a sudden bad? Why are they saying, oh, but the EU don't do that? Isn't that the point of leaving the EU? Of course, we could have done this with or without doing that. Aren't we supposed to be leading the way as a beacon of democracy? After all, imagine two neighbours, not countries, actual neighbours. They both do the same jobs, let's say, for the same pay, the same employer. They both pay their taxes. In fact, one of them pays higher taxes because they pay the NHS surcharge. Now, why should the one who pays more taxes not have a vote, but the one who pays less tax with the same job and income can vote? Where's the argument for that? The second argument he makes is, why would we give the vote to Bulgarians but not Bolivians? Oh, I do like a bit of alliteration. He's making the point that Labour's plan is specifically for EU citizens. Now, there are two things I would have to say about this one. First, why not indeed? I am fully in favour of anyone who is settled in the UK, paying their taxes to be able to vote in general elections. I have approximately zero concerns with that. No taxation without representation and all that. And like I say, non-British citizens actually pay more tax than British citizens. But the second point is the unspoken fact of qualifying for votes in general elections. Because you may imagine from listening to the arguments of Brexiteers against this plan of Labour's, that at the moment only British citizens can vote in general elections. Now, granted, it may be people who were born elsewhere but now have UK citizenship, but essentially only UK citizens can vote. Well, no, we already allow non-British citizens to vote, and I don't just mean people from Ireland. A settled Australian citizen, for example, can vote in general elections. In fact, they don't even technically need full settlement rights. So why should an Australian be allowed to vote in general elections in this country, but not an Austrian, alliteration again, you see, living in Britain under the same circumstances? I've said it before, the hypocrisy is what particularly irritates me. People having opposing views is great because you can engage with them in debate. I love that. But people like Hannan are hypocrites. They are bad faith actors. You can't debate with them because they just lie. They're so inconsistent. He says that Labour are doing this in order to boost the pro-European vote in elections and effectively change the nature of the electorate. Now, it would absolutely do that. But the argument against it has to be made on consistent democratic grounds. You have to argue that there is some reason why this should not happen. And therefore, well, what about citizens of, why should someone from Austria not be able to vote, but someone from Australia can? You cannot argue, as Hannan is, that it shouldn't happen because the people who would get the vote will largely disagree with him. That is not a democratic argument. EU citizens with full settlement rights are paying their taxes. They clearly have an intention to stay for the long term. It takes a long time to be able to get settled status. A lot of hoops to go through. They have a right to a say in at least how those taxes that they pay are spent. They are subject to the laws of this country. They have a right to a say in who decides those laws. But, the Brexiteers are really worried about this one. Interestingly, there was another Express article on the subject of giving the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds, another aspect of Labour's electoral reform plans. But they were much more sanguine on that one. I may pick that one up later this week because that was a bit more interesting. But the prospect of EU citizens voting absolutely shocks them. And I've said before, those of us in favour of wider electoral reform should be more excited by this than I think many are. I think a lot of people look at the end goal and they just think of it as a lever, like we just want the next Labour government to do this end goal in one leap. But there are steps to a reform. Take joining the EU, for example. Now, there's already majority support for joining, but that makes no difference in a first-past-the-post system. Also, it has not been subjected to rigorous campaigning from those who wish us to remain outside. But many of those supporting rejoin live in safe constituencies where switching a vote won't change anything. Support will continue to grow, of course it will. There will definitely be a different dynamic to the Brexit debate for the general election in 2028 or 2029, whenever it is. But the potential for several million EU citizens to suddenly be part of the electoral process, that does change the dynamic. And the thing about this new injection of voters, they're not all loaded up in the cities, but around the country. That includes in marginal constituencies. I actually wonder if it's going to make polling much more difficult, because it would represent a huge shake-up of the electorate, largely untested. It would also represent a much less xenophobic proportion of swing voters for obvious reasons. And this is why Brexiteers are afraid. In some ways, more so than they would be of PR. Remember, they only just won the Brexit referendum. They really only just win these general elections as well. You know, on PR, they're mostly split on the issue. See, there are some Brexiteers, such as Nigel Farage, interested in proportional representation. It's the Tory Brexiteers who are dead against it, but not the entire movement. But extending the vote to settled EU citizens, that scares all of them, and with good reason. And if they want to object to Bulgarians having the vote but not Bolivians, well, tell them from me, I am more than happy for anyone with full settlement rights in the UK to have full voting rights as well. Global Britain, don't you know? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.